Hey guys, it's Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist in Georgia, and here to answer the question, what happens if my offshore company's bank account gets shut down? This is happening a lot lately. It's happened a lot, and we'll cover this in a separate video, with people who are banking in the Caribbean, the Cook Islands, Mauritius, Belize, the traditional offshore banks where, according to Western governments, anything goes. So those banks have been having problems. But I'll tell you a story about a father and son who run a business who came to me recently. And about 2 years ago, they set up their business in Hong Kong. And they did everything that I recommend against, which was they went on internet forums and talked to random people and what are you doing? And people said, oh, I'm in Hong Kong. And they didn't realize that those people had different citizenships, those people had different businesses, different structures in every different way, and what worked for them may not work for this father and son. But they did it, and then they took the advice one step further and went to one of these cheapo incorporating places where they filled out the paperwork, no respect for what would be needed in the US. And what the cheapo incorporators in Hong Kong have always done is said, great, go get a bank account at HSBC. Now, HSBC, as I've told you before, is probably about the worst bank on planet Earth, everywhere. In the US, in Hong Kong, everywhere. I may have a contender very soon for a worse bank than HSBC, but it's going to be really close. HSBC is one of the worst. But all these cheap guys, they didn't bother, that's why they're so cheap. They never had great relationships with other banks in Hong Kong, so they just sent everyone to HSBC, where paperwork was Byzantine, and people were always getting asked to fill out forms, and just it was very difficult for many people. Well, fast forward to a couple months ago, and these guys call me and they say, we've been given 30 days to close our account. And after that, HSBC is just going to, send the money to wherever it came from. And this is becoming a problem. Now, the first piece of advice to avoid this problem when you set up your offshore company is you want to have more than one bank account, precisely for this reason. This is especially true if you're a U.S. citizen, since banks are cracking down on U.S. citizens. This is especially true if you have some kind of nominee director, which I don't recommend, but some banks are cracking down on that. This is especially true if you have a company in some kind of faraway island outpost like Seychelles, which banks are also trying to cleanse their books of. But really it applies to anyone. If you have a business, even if it's domestic business, if you're in the U.S., right, why not have two business bank accounts? You never know when one will have a problem. And so not only were these guys having their account closed, but for the last 6 months before HSBC decided to shut them down, they were sending them letters, we're freezing your account until you fill out this form. And then, okay, now you're back open. Okay, 2 weeks later, now we're freezing your account until we get this FATCA form back, and it's 21 pages, and they won't tell you what to do. So HSBC is terrible, and if you want to avoid big banking problems, you avoid HSBC like the plague, the Black Plague. But really, the issue, you can't entirely blame HSBC. These guys, A, should have structured their company in a way that better served them. They shouldn't have just followed all the internet forum advice. And they should have had a second bank account. Now, what do you do if it's closed? Well, HSBC in Hong Kong, is just one example, is closing a lot of accounts, and there's not much you can do. I was there recently just kind of hanging out, and I saw probably a dozen or more guys, white guys who look like they're there in Hong Kong in HSBC's basement just to close their account. Whether it's because life was getting so difficult for them or because HSBC also closed their account, we will not know. But the banks that you don't want to work with or that don't want to work with you, forget about those and focus on finding at least two banks that accept your structure and accept what you're doing. And one of the things that I see people do that causes them problems down the road is they kind of fudge the numbers or they're unnecessarily vague. You got to be honest with your bankers. You got to tell them, here's what I'm doing. I've heard guys who run adult businesses or run kind of controversial businesses where they go in and try to dance around what they do. It's only going to cause you problems. You have to find someone, kind of like dating. You have to find someone who accepts you in your business for who you are. There are places that do that. The question, as we always talk about, is, what are the criteria? If you insist on having a company in the Seychelles and using nominee directors and having $7 to put in your account, the banks are going to be limited. So the first piece of advice that I recommend to anyone who's having their offshore bank account closed for their company is review the company structure. Okay, maybe maybe the problem isn't you, maybe the problem isn't the bank, maybe the problem is that you've got a structure that just isn't really well accepted in the year 2017. Again, we'll be doing other videos on this. Seychelles companies, I always single them out. Banks don't generally want them. Even British Virgin Islands companies in the last year, the last kind of European banks that accepted them, have kind of shied away. So the first thing to do when your offshore bank account is closed is my company set up the right way? Is it serving me? Because you can put a Band-Aid on the problem and have another problem with the next bank 6 months from now. It's better to get the company structured in a way that serves you for the long term, for the next 5 or 10 years, rather than continuing to put Band-Aids on. Because not only is it a waste, not only is it a huge pain, dealing with bank account closures and all the forms, it's so difficult, and they got to send the money, and they always screw it up. But you want to have the structure right, because you don't want to keep fixing the problem, and it's only going to take away from your business. So that's step one. Step two is find the banks that serve you. That may mean going to an emerging market. There are some good emerging markets where banks will take a lot of different companies. It also means the third step is being prepared. Have apostille documents for your company. Have preferably you as the director on your company, because banks are going to want to see you. They don't want to see a corporate nominee director. So evaluate your corporate structure. Be prepared and find banks that serve you and your business's needs wherever they may be. That's what to do if your offshore company's bank account gets closed. If you want to review your structure, nomadcapitalist.com can help you and figure out maybe the whole thing is set up improperly and it needs to be changed to better serve you, or maybe there's a quick fix. But having 2 bank accounts will solve the problem, and following those 3 steps to replace the banks that have closed you will solve the problem going forward.